Good morning, everyone. My name is Brent Schafer, and I'm a financial advisor here at HFG Trust. I wanted to thank you all for attending our College Planning 101 webinar. We were really excited to be able to partner with Ryan Keel to provide this event and information to you. Ryan Keel is a certified college planning specialist who has an extensive background as a financial advisor. In his time as a financial advisor, Ryan noticed that there was a gap between the investment world and the college financial aid world. He ultimately decided to quit his career as an advisor and become a college planning specialist. He currently runs College Smart, a business focused not on just saving for college, but saving on the cost of college as well. Ryan has also helped a few employees from Community First Bank and HFG Trust with college planning for their own children, and I've heard nothing but good things from it. Today's presentation has been pre-recorded to make sure that we stay on time for the entire hour. The presentation itself is about 45 minutes in length, and there will be time for questions at the end. Questions may be posted in the upper right-hand corner of the screen during the presentation, and we will address questions towards the end of the hour. With that, we hope that you enjoy today's presentation.
It used to be that homeowners planned to pay off their mortgages and live out their retirement debt-free. But a 2018 survey by national mortgage firm American Financing found that 44% of Americans between the age of 60 and 70 have a mortgage when they retire. Nearly 17% think it's possible they will never pay off that mortgage. And a stunning 32% predict that it will take more than 8 years to do so. And why is that? For many families, it's the price of sending their child to a costly college. We've all heard student college loan debt is growing. Americans owe over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. That's 45 million borrowers. The class of 2019 graduated with an average of $29,900 in debt. And this one's surprising to a lot of people. 3 million people over the age of 60 are still paying off college loans. That's crazy. Sometimes the price is even higher. Researchers have found a direct correlation between areas that sent a higher number of students to college and an increased number in foreclosures in the years following. The authors of the study write, "The gap between the total cost of college and the financial aid provided may still be too large for many families across the income distribution to bear." So this brings us to a clear understanding of the challenge many families face as their kids enter high school and prepare to pick a college. The problem that we're dealing with is that families often overpay for college. They take on too much debt, and they hurt their savings and retirement plans because they tumbled unprepared into the late-stage college funding pressure cooker. It's hard to think about college planning as a major financial planning challenge for many families when you just want to send your kid to a good school. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we do need context for understanding all the forces that'll come into play. So here's a quick rundown. Students and parents feel the academic and social pressure of competition. Colleges target your child, wanting them to apply mostly so they can reject their application, which sounds a little insane, but it's actually true. Impending deadlines promote tension and rash decisions. I think we've all been there. Your student's college list may be unrealistic and probably uninformed about the actual costs, the degree earning power, and the average number of years to graduation, all of which are very important. Unfortunately, school counselors aren't trained to help families figure out how to pay for college. The vast majority of families just lack the knowledge and don't have the guidance to help them through the process. All of these dynamics contribute to something none of us want to have happen, overpaying for college. And that's why we're here today. That late-stage college funding pressure cooker, well, it can deliver some pretty unhappy results. Families act rashly, and as a result, many tap home equity or take out a large second mortgage to pay for college. And as we saw earlier, many of those are not paid off by the time they retire. Others divert retirement funds to pay for tuition and have to work longer than they planned on. The glaring truth is that most families just lack the knowledge and guidance on how to get the best price for college. Now, before we go on, I just wanted to stop and take a second to thank you for showing up today and committing your time to learning more about college planning and funding. And I can assure you of one thing about this presentation is that I believe you'll be better prepared to meet the late-stage college planning challenges after listening to this talk. So, getting your kids through grade school and high school is hard enough. You've been working, maybe saving for the eventual college tuition. Then boom, your kid's a junior or senior in college, and you realize you haven't planned enough. The cost of tuition plus room and board and other fees are higher than you expected, which is incredibly common because it's going up faster than most people realize. The stress increases, you keep getting slick brochures from fancy colleges, and you hear your friends talk about where their kids are going. As we just talked about, this can oftentimes lead to poor decisions, which may negatively impact your family's financial health for years, sometimes even decades. And I've seen that happen to clients before, and I want to help you before you get to that stage. Your son or daughter can go to a good school, have a great college experience, and do it without saddling any of you with undue debt. I've seen that happen too, and it can just be really sad. So that's why I do this presentation. And in case you're wondering, I also want to assure everybody that this is not a sales presentation. You'll not hear anything remotely to a sales pitch tonight. Now, in order to help you learn more about what we discussed tonight, I'll be offering you a handout later on called The Parent's Guide to Cutting College Costs. That's a good overview of the topic. Plus, you should have received in an email a 2-page handout called The 4 Keys to Cutting College Costs, How to Avoid Overpaying. And these are the notes for the presentation you're about to see, so you don't have to worry about writing everything down. All of the key ideas are right there for you to read later. And with an issue like college planning, where everyone's decision is unique and personal to your own circumstances, I invite you to reach out to your advisor to schedule a meeting where you can conduct an expected family contribution analysis for you and get an idea of what strategy would fit best into your overall retirement plan. And I'll tell you more about that later. One last thing about questions. Inevitably, you will have some, and sometimes you will have a lot of them, so feel free to submit those as the presentation is going, and then once we're wrapped up, we will do a Q&A at the end and try and cover as many of those as we can. Now, back to our presentation. When it comes to late-stage college planning, the biggest problem is that there is no plan. It's not well thought out, but until you send in your acceptance letter, it's not too late at all. So let's continue. Now, I don't want to make things seem completely hopeless. The fact that you're here indicates that you're ready to tackle what is actually a very big financial planning issue for families. And that's a good sign because, as you'll see, there are steps you can start taking now that will make this period of your life less stressful. You'll be less pressured if you have a late-stage college funding strategy. By now, you're probably tired of me introducing all of the complications, and you're thinking, what is the first most important thing I need to know so I can avoid overpaying? And that brings us to our first key. Parents must lead the college selection process with the child as a co-pilot because you have the most to lose. And by lose, I mean picking the wrong school, overpaying for it, or underestimating total costs, including how many years it actually takes to earn a degree. Now, I'm not saying that the student shouldn't be involved in the college planning process. That's not true at all. But the parents need to know what they're willing to pay and where the money comes from. And it's all too easy to go into the searching process blindly, looking at every school that shows up at a college fair or sends you really nice marketing material. Then the student falls in love with a certain school, which I've seen turn into a complete disaster. There was a dad who let his son apply to his dream school, which was NYU, just to see if he could get in. And of course the son got in, and the father, it was impossible to tell him no at that point. And unfortunately, NYU was notoriously stingy with their scholarships and aid, and the dad ended up paying a lot more than he really could afford to. And it's always much better to know your facts and figures at the beginning of the search for colleges. It can save you a ton of money and a lot of headache. Here are a few items about college that you don't see or hear much about, but I wanted to put them in front of you as part of understanding why it's so important for you to be running the college selection process for your child. There are several large organizations, most notably U.S. News and World Reports, who absolutely love to tout their college ranking lists, but don't be fooled. These are not lists you should use to determine your child's college. Why? Because they encourage institutional bad behavior, cheating, and admission tricks. They have a formula that can be gamed. They make popularity a big ratings factor. They use 6-year graduation rates instead of 4. It encourages schools to favor affluent students through merit scholarships. And they don't really measure what's important. Next, you might be wondering, so let's say I'm in charge, leading this process. The news is filled with the rising price of college. Can I send my child to a good school without completely blowing my savings? The answer is yes, which brings us to our second main point. The news media likes to hype the rising cost of college and staggering student loans. These are true, but they miss the important detail that higher education is actually a buyer's market, despite news about increased costs and high rejection rates. The price discounts are quite common among state universities as well as private institutions. Schools give discounts through grants and scholarships, and one thing you should take away from this slide is it's clearly not just A students who get scholarships and grants. Just look at the high percentage of students getting price breaks. Nearly everyone who attended a private college receives some type of price cut from his or her school. And for years now, the tuition discount has been creeping up. The percentage of students who receive grants and scholarships at private schools is actually at a historic high. The average tuition discount at private colleges and universities is also at a historic level, around 60%. On this slide, you'll see an example of how the typical discount slashes the tuition price. You might naturally be wondering why schools are giving out so much money, and here's the reason. For most schools, it's buyer's market. And this might seem strange because all the media attention is usually focused on the most elite universities that reject nearly all of the applicants. In fact, the schools at the top of the rankings heap compete to see who can reject the most teenagers. It's really weird. But most schools, however, they don't enjoy this kind of advantage. They have to work hard to fill their freshman slots. And to do that, they have to offer financial enticements to get students to come to their schools. So here's a closer look at what the colleges are up against during the admissions season. Only 27% of admissions directors at state schools meet their goal by May 1st. Just a little over half of admissions directors at private schools and public schools didn't meet their freshman goals by July 1st. And only less than 2% of all admissions directors say they hadn't been concerned about meeting enrollment goals for 2020. Now, you might be feeling intrigued or overwhelmed with all this new information. Regardless, you probably want to know, what are the key things to focus on in order to successfully navigate the college funding process? Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. You're going to want to gather the pegs for your schools to start the process of identifying the best deal and the best price. PEGS is an easy acronym we created that speaks to some key information gathering that'll get you going on your college journey. And PEGS stands for price, expected family contribution, graduation rate, and salary. And let's look at each briefly. We start with price, which means net price calculators. You use these tools to discover a school's true cost. Let's take a look. One of the most infuriating aspects of the college admission process is that traditionally, families couldn't know what any college was actually going to cost until their child received his or her financial aid award. And even worse, they might not have gotten that offer until the spring, which really didn't give them much time to make a decision before the deposit deadline, which is often May 1st. Applying to schools, however, it doesn't need to be a financial crapshoot if you use the net price calculators before your child applies to any colleges. In a net price calculator, it's supposed to provide you with a personalized estimate of what your particular school will really cost. It represents what a student will have to pay after scholarships and grants from the federal and state governments and the school itself are subtracted. When using a calculator, some families will discover that the cost of a $55,000 university will be $20,000 or $10,000 or even lower sometimes. And for other families, the cost will actually be $55,000. So let's say, for example, that a college costs $50,000. The student will receive a $30,000 award from the school and a state grant of $5,000. The net price for that student will be $15,000. So you see that net price equals the true price of a college because it only considers free money and it disregards loan, which when calculating the cost of the school, because loans just get rolled back in. Federal law requires schools to post a net price calculator for freshmen on their websites, and some schools even provide a calculator for transfer students too. If you want to avoid budget-busting schools, it's critical to know what the actual prices of a particular school will be before your child falls in love with them. In fact, turning to net price calculators could ultimately save you tens of thousands of dollars by focusing your efforts on schools that will be more generous to your family. Too many parents get guilted into paying for a college that far outstrips their budget, and this can jeopardize their own retirement plans. So knowing in advance what schools cost will help families draw up an appropriate college list and reduce or hopefully eliminate financial surprises. And thanks to net price calculators, there's no reason why students and parents can't have a pretty good idea what a college will offer before deciding whether to apply. Helpful calculators will require information from your tax return and your latest non-retirement investment account statements. You want to gather that information before you start. You should turn to these calculators to get a handle on what sort of applicants capture the best awards at an institution. So what kind of grade point average or test scores does it take for a student to win a greater award from a specific school? And with these tools, you can manipulate the figures to see whether it would be worth it for the child, for instance, to take the SAT or ACT again. Would a higher test score boost the child's potential package? Would a slightly higher GPA matter? And it can also be important to measure what impact, if any, a family's home equity would have on an award. Sometimes that can be a huge difference. And with so much money at stake, it's worth taking the time to use these calculators strategically. Sometimes it can be hard finding a net price calculator on some schools' websites. An easy way to do it is to just Google the name of the school and net price calculator. That should pull it up fairly quickly for you. Now, accurate calculator results won't be available until later years of high school, but if you do have younger students, even elementary school, feel free to play around with the numbers and add different GPAs and test scores just to see how that can affect the price at different schools. It can be really eye-opening. You need to understand that not all calculators are good ones. The weakest calculators rely on the federal template, and using these could take less than a minute or two to complete. The questions are minimal, which often leads to pretty dubious cost estimates. And the federal calculator really only asks for income ranges, but a good one will require figures directly off your income tax return. Also, bad calculators can rely on old data. Some are still using information from 2015, 2016, so be sure and check how old the data is if you're going to use one. And these federal calculators, they're only meant to provide personalized cost estimates for families who are seeking need-based aid. And even then, the need-based aid answers they're simply averages, and they don't calculate merit scholarships at all. If you see this icon displayed on a website, it means it's using the federal net price calculator, so just keep that in mind. You're going to be getting, slightly inaccurate or not very detailed answers from these. Now, let's move on to the E in PEGS. That stands for Expected Family Contribution. This is a federally calculated number that tells you what you're expected to pay. Your expected family contribution is a dollar amount that represents what a financial aid formula believes your household should contribute to pay for 1 year of your child's college education, but it's not necessarily what you're going to pay. Your EFC, it's based on a number of factors, including income, non-retirement money, education account assets, size of the household, marital status of the parents, and the number of students in college. So the EFC is going to give you a good idea of whether you will qualify for need-based aid or if you should start looking for schools that provide more merit scholarships. So this is going to help you as you go shopping for colleges. And it can be tricky, but this is an area where your advisor and we can help you walk through obtaining your EFC and help you learn how to use it when you're comparing schools. And I'll talk about that more later on. So to make things a little bit more complicated, there are two EFC financial formulas out there. The more popular one, the federal formula, it's tied to the free application for federal student aid. You probably heard of that as the FAFSA. And this is the federal aid application that students have to complete in order to qualify for federal and state aid at any school they attend. And the vast majority of colleges will also use the FAFSA to determine who gets their in-house money, grants, and scholarships. And I'll explain the FAFSA more in just a second. The institutional formula, on the other hand, is tied to the CSS profile, which is a creation of the College Board. And this formula is used by roughly 200 private schools to determine who gets their in-house money. And there also are a small amount of public universities that use it also, like University of Virginia, University of Michigan. So these two formulas do have some significant differences, and sometimes an EFC between the two will be very similar, and sometimes they can be vastly different. I want to take a step back and explain the timeline here. Now, you can get your free estimate of your EFC from thecollegeboard.com, which will be pretty close to the official one. But get an EFC estimate as early as your freshman or sophomore year of high school. For your official EFC, and in order to qualify for any help, you have to complete the free application for federal student aid, also known as FAFSA, which you can find at fafsa.ed.gov. Now, this is important. The first day that parents can file for financial aid is on October 1st of the child's senior year in high school. And parents will be using 2-year-old tax returns to complete the FAFSA, so there's really no reason not to file as soon as possible. And this is really important to know. You must file your FAFSA early. Aid from states and public universities, that can run out, so filing early is essential. You definitely want to be at the front of the line. And if you miss the deadline to file the FAFSA in your state, you'll be ineligible for any state aid, which can be a pretty big deal. And some states have early deadlines too, so it's another thing to be aware of. Finally, even if you don't think you're going to qualify for financial aid, applying early to state universities can boost your chances of merit scholarships, since deadlines can be early also. And just do it regardless of whether you think you're going to qualify or not, because other things can be tied to it, like work study. It just keeps your options open. The lowest EFC a family can have is 0, and that means a student has no ability to pay for college. And in contrast, there's no cap on the EFC for high-income families. It's possible to have an EFC of $40,000, $50,000, or even $100,000 or more. And when the EFC is high like that and need-based aid is out of the question, that's when you shift gears and you start looking for schools that provide more merit scholarships for affluent students. As I said before, it's best to get a ballpark idea of what your EFC will be in your child's freshman year of high school or even earlier. Obtaining a preliminary EFC, it'll give you a rough idea of what kind of financial obligations you're going to be facing, and it's going to make the planning process much easier. And families will usually have to pay more for college than their EFC indicates that they can afford, because most schools don't meet 100% of the students' demonstrated financial need. Consequently, it's important to identify the most generous schools that will consider your child an attractive candidate, and we'll go into more details about that later. The EFC calculator, it can be tricky in terms of understanding which aspects of your finance needed to be included, and sometimes more importantly, which ones need to be excluded when you complete the process. And this is a service we offer whenever we make this presentation, and I'll give you more details later on how to request an EFC analysis. Okay, let's take a couple minutes to run through some EFC scenarios and give you an idea of what EFCs are possible. And let's start here with an example from a middle-class family with average income and low savings. And I'm only using non-retirement money in my examples because the formulas don't consider retirement money in their calculations, which is actually one of the more common mistakes on the FAFSA, people including too much information. So in this example, there's a married couple with one child heading to college and a younger sibling. And let's take a look at their EFC results. The EFC for this family using both methodologies is around $2,500. With this modest EFC, the family would ideally be looking for schools that provide very good need-based aid, because their ability to pay for college is limited. And this could potentially come from in-state universities or private colleges that offer generous aid. Here's an example of how much aid a family with a low EFC of $2,500 could be eligible for when applying to an expensive school. And it's important to add that only 6 dozen or so colleges and universities say they meet the full financial need of students. Now, let's look at a higher income family. This family has more assets, home equity, and considerably more income. Like the previous example, there are 4 in the household, with married parents and the oldest heading to college. The EFC for this household ranges from about $34,000 to $35,000 roughly. There would be some elite schools that would provide this family with need-based aid, but with the vast majority of schools, the family would want to be looking for institutions that provide hefty merit scholarships to higher income students. And remember, there is no cap on a family's EFC, so some very wealthy parents, they can have an EFC that exceeds the cost of even an expensive private university. Now, let's take a look at this same family, but with 2 kids in college and an adjusted gross income of about $150,000. This would be the EFC for each child. With a reduced EFC, the family's chances for need-based aid rise significantly. And it's important to understand that a family's federal EFC for each child drops by 50%, and the institutional EFC drops by about 40% when there are 2 children in college at the same time. So a family that might not qualify for need-based financial aid with 1 child in college may be eligible with 2 or more in college, so that can make for some interesting planning opportunities. You can determine if a student would be eligible for need-based aid by subtracting the EFC from the school's price tag. In this example, there's no chance for need-based aid because the family's EFC exceeds the price of the private college. The student wouldn't qualify for need-based aid. Instead, the student would hope for merit scholarships. In this scenario, the student would be eligible for need-based aid of up to $23,000 from the private college because the price of the institution is far more expensive and exceeds the family's EFC. As a practical matter, a family with an EFC this high would typically be looking for schools that provide generous merit scholarships. It would primarily be elite schools with excellent financial aid that would give this family need-based aid. So to sum it up, let's look at college funding strategies informed by two different EFCs. First, families with small EFCs should look for colleges that provide generous need-based aid, as well as their own state schools that will have need-based programs for residents. And remember, it's also important to file the FAFSA as early as you can, since students tend to receive twice as much grant money in state programs and state universities if they file earlier. So write that down, October 1st of your child's senior year. Yes, it is definitely that important. Now, families with large EFCs should look for private and state schools that give good merit aid to many students. And the most elite private universities tend to give little to no merit scholarships because they already have plenty of high-income students who will come without a price break. So that gives you a sense of how the EFC plays out. And after you obtain your EFC, then you can start to hone in on what type of schools are most appropriate to aim for your situation. The G in PEGS stands for graduation rate. This part of your school analysis is looking at what % of students graduate and how long it takes them. Parents assume that their children will graduate in 4 years, but this usually doesn't happen. According to federal statistics, the 4-year grad rate for private colleges and universities is 55% and only 39% for state schools. So it's always important to check the 4-year grad rates, since any delay in graduation can significantly boost the cost of college. And there can be major differences among the same types of schools too, so always check. You can find 4-, 5-, and 6-year graduation rates at College Results online. You can also find the 6-year grad rates broken down by race and ethnicity, gender, and income. And the difference between grad rates among men and women sometimes can be dramatic. To find this site, you can just Google college completion, and that should be able to pull it up for you. Here's an example of a school with an excellent graduation rate. You'll see the overall grad rate as well as broken down by various factors. Here's an example of a university, San Diego State, that has an average graduation rate. So that's what you need to focus on for graduation rates. Now let's move on to the final letter in PEGS. The S in PEGS stands for salary. And as part of your evaluation process, you may also want to look at a school's salary outcome and consider them in context of how much you're paying for your child's degree. Parents tend to overpay based on assumptions and rankings, but a big investment isn't always worth it. The place to research salary outcomes is a website called Educate to Career. It shows you the average salaries by major of graduates of a certain institution 10 years after graduation. And naturally, as you're weighing accepting a college offer versus another, this could be an effective tool to use. So let's look at an example. Here are two Northeast schools with really strong engineering programs. So let's suppose your child gets into both. What does that mean in terms of price? Here it is. You can see that there's a pretty big price difference between them, and we're looking at out-of-state tuition here. If you extrapolate that out 4 years, the difference between NJIT at $132,000 and Drexel at $220,000, that's $88,000 difference. And if you live in New Jersey, it would be even more extreme. So now let's take a look at salaries for a mechanical engineer from Drexel. So you see, Educate to Career runs the occupation titles down the left and the salaries on the right. So go ahead and take a look at the salaries for Drexel. You're going to have to look closely because now I'm going to bring up the same info for the New Jersey Institute of Technology. It's hard to tell a difference, right? It's not really that much, a couple $100 here and there mostly. Our example shows that the old adage, you get what you pay for, it doesn't necessarily apply to college degrees, but the idea of a return on investment is certainly a factor to consider. And many of us know from life experience that job salaries aren't arranged in any sort of neat continuum from highest to lowest based on a school's brand name. It just doesn't work that way. Getting clarity about the pegs for the schools on your list is very helpful, but it's not the whole picture yet. You're still probably wondering, will my student qualify for financial aid? And how does that fit with grants, scholarships, and loans? This brings us to our fourth key. The common question, will my kid qualify for aid, is best answered when you understand how discounts, scholarships, and loans work to produce the lowest college cost possible. Let's look at types of financial aid first. And there are four that you see here. And just so we're all on the same page, let's run through their definitions quick. First off, we have grants. They don't need to be repaid, they're primarily need-based, and they're often from the state or federal government, such as Pell Grants. The second is scholarships. They also don't need to be repaid. They're usually awarded based on merit or other criteria such as ethnicity, geographic location, athletics, academic merit, etc. And they come from a variety of sources also, so private foundations, corporations, and the colleges themselves. And then there are loans. And we won't go deeply into college loans now, but there are two main types of federal loans that are strictly for the student. The more attractive option is the direct subsidized loan, and that's where the government pays the interest while the student is in school and during grace and deferment periods. There must be demonstrated financial need to qualify for this one. Then there's the direct unsubsidized loan. That's where the student pays the interest during all periods or defers the interest while enrolled, and the interest does accumulate on them. There is no financial need required for unsubsidized loans. We also have direct plus loans for parents, and these are designed to help families pay for education expenses that aren't covered by other financial aid. They can be very expensive though, so any way we can find a better alternative, we'll try and do that. And finally, here are some other options. You could get a home equity loan, but keep in mind the length of the repayment period and how that will affect your retirement plans. That's definitely something you and an advisor can work out. You can also get private loans to pay for college, and these typically require very good to excellent credit, and there's a range of institutions that underwrite these types of loans. Now, about 2/3 of students pay for college with the help of scholarships and grants, and that type of financial assistance comes from the four sources you see here. The two biggest sources are from the federal government and the institutions themselves. Okay, let's look at what comprises federal aid. These are the three sources of federal help for parents and students. Most are income-based, grants and work-study jobs, loans for students and parents, and tax credits such as the American Opportunity Tax Credit and the Lifetime Learning Tax Credit. For families who are shut out of the federal grants, they can still qualify for federal college loans since there are no income limits. However, without filling out the FAFSA, parents and students don't have access to the federal student and parent loans. So it goes back to being sure you fill that out. The vast majority of federal money is awarded through the Pell Grant program. And the maximum Pell Grant is currently $6,495. Students who are eligible for this grant must have an adjusted gross family income of under $27,000. The larger the family income and the smaller the size of the household, the lower potential Pell Grant award. According to federal statistics, 92% of Pell Grant recipients have a household adjusted gross income of under $60,000. So that's the federal government. Let's talk about the states. All states have aid programs, but they vary in what they offer. Most state grants go to students who require financial assistance. Some states, however, are dispensing most or all of their aid based on factors like GPA and test scores. Most of the states that award the majority of their aid by merit are located in the South, and these programs often benefit more affluent students. You can find links to the aid programs that are available in each of the 50 states by visiting the website National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. Unless money is no object, it makes sense for a student to include at least one in-state public university on their college list. Now, in-state schools, however, they won't always be the least expensive option, even though that's a widely held belief. And if you need financial aid, you need to be aware that public universities very rarely give need-based aid to non-residents. They usually reserve that for their own residents. And the tuition price for non-residents can typically be 2 to 3 times higher, so definitely keep that in mind when you're putting together the college list. Non-residents looking for college money should really consider more merit scholarships, which are awarded regardless of income. The percentage of college money devoted to merit scholarships, it's grown dramatically, and it's due to three reasons. The first is that administrators at state universities are interested in increasing their U.S. news rankings, just like their peers at private colleges. And one way to do this is to give merit awards to attract students with higher academic profiles, the type that the U.S. News favors in its ranking methodology. So it's a way to make them look better on the list. The second is public universities, they also use merit scholarships to attract non-residents who still typically pay more than in-state students. So that helps the bottom line of the colleges, especially as schools have been suffering from reduced state government funding, which really began with the recession a decade ago. And lastly, the competition for good students is so high among many state universities that they're finding it necessary to boost their merit scholarship awards just to be competitive. State schools often have too many applicants to take a look at the students holistically. A school could have tens of thousands of applications, and consequently, state universities, they rely heavily on GPA and test scores to make admissions decisions and to dispense merit awards. The upside is this makes it much easier to get a good sense of what kind of merit scholarships a student might qualify for at a public university. You can use Google to find scholarships that an individual schools offer, or you can contact us and we can help you get a list. Scholarships, they can be easier to get at larger state universities that are less popular. For instance, what it takes to win a merit scholarship at the University of Colorado, which is a very popular destination, as you can imagine, it's more difficult academically than what it would take to win an award at, say, the University of New Mexico or University of Maine. And keep in mind that many of the most popular state universities, they enjoy great brand names or are located in desirable locations like near ski slopes. They can command higher prices for outside students. The sticker prices are going to be lower at schools that aren't in high demand. And institutions that are most likely to meet their admissions goals are public research universities like UCLA, UC Berkeley, Virginia, Michigan, and elite private research universities like the Ivies. Now, these schools, they don't have to worry about attracting applicants with scholarships because people are coming there regardless. Here is an illustration of how state universities can share their merit awards with families. This one was pulled off the website of the University of Utah. Individual academic departments can offer their own scholarships too. For affluent families, the most likely source of money will be from the colleges themselves. The vast majority of private schools provide merit money to affluent students. These colleges, they also provide need-based aid. And you might be surprised that close to a third of college students are enrolled in private nonprofit colleges. And many parents, they automatically assume that private colleges will be too expensive and they don't consider them. And that can be a big mistake. And it's true that the price tags for private schools are more expensive than an in-state university, but the actual price you pay won't always be as high. And think back to key number 2. Higher education is actually a buyer's market, despite news about increased costs and high rejection rates. And for years now, the tuition discount has been creeping up. The percentage of students who receive grants and scholarships at private schools is actually at a historic high, and it's about 89%. For families who won't qualify for need-based aid, private colleges and universities routinely award merit scholarships. Schools also widely practice what's called preferential packaging. The best award go to the applicants that the institution wants the most. It's fairly simple. A student is more likely to obtain a good package if they're in the top 25% of the accepted students at that institution. What families also need to understand is that the more a college costs, the more likely they would qualify for need-based aid. And at some schools, students could end up with both need-based and merit scholarships. If you won't qualify for need-based aid and money is tight, the worst place to apply to college from a financial standpoint are the most highly ranked universities. Look at the top of the U.S. news rankings and you'll see what kind of schools that includes. It's universities like the Ivy Leagues, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, Northwestern. Schools like these are swamped with high-income candidates, so they don't really have to offer merit scholarships. They're already attracting great candidates who are willing to pay full price. While there are nearly 2,800 four-year colleges and universities in the United States, There are less than 6 dozen that claim to meet 100% of the demonstrated financial need of all or most of their freshmen. Schools that are most likely to provide the best need-based financial aid are the elite schools. And if you get into schools like those on this slide and your family needs a great deal of financial help, you're likely to get it. But in contrast, if you're wealthy and your child gets into one of these highly rated schools, you're likely to pay full price. Schools that offer the most generous need-based aid, they're among those most highly ranked by the U.S. News and World News. These schools, they tend to have large endowments, tons of money basically, and they also attract a lot of students who pay full price so they can afford to offer generous packages to those who really need the help. Students requiring financial assistance who get into schools like these have essentially won the education lottery. Of course, these schools are among the hardest to get into, so there's that too. On the other hand, the schools on this slide don't give merit aid to students who don't qualify for financial need. They don't have to because they have plenty of high-income students whose parents will pay full price. The schools most likely to provide discounts to nearly all of their accepted students are the ones that aren't as well known. And many institutions that fall into that category are colleges and master's level universities. The institutions that are least likely to provide merit awards are research universities. That's because they're so popular they don't need to offer discounts to attract students. And high-income students who attend elite research universities are more likely to pay full price or close to it. One way to get a quick look at whether a school will provide good need-based aid or merit awards is to head to the College Board's website, type in the name of the school on the homepage, and then click on the school's paying link. You'll be brought to a page with the school's cost of attendance. Then you can click on the Financial Aid by the Numbers link. That's where you'll see some interesting statistics. Now, this is one of my favorite things to show when I'm working with families. I'm going to illustrate what you can find in a school's Financial Aid by the Numbers section by using Yale University. And on this slide, you can see up at the top that the school meets 100% of financial need, and it also meets the full need of 100% of its undergraduates. This is excellent. In fact, this is as good as it gets for someone who needs help with college costs. Yale's average need-based award is over $61,000, which, needless to say, is really high. This slide also shows that Yale doesn't give merit scholarships, the red arrow on the bottom. The average non-need-based aid category is blank, and that means a wealthy family with a high EFC will pay close to full price, if not full price. This slide illustrates a school, NYU, that typically provides poor financial aid and very small merit awards. On average, this popular school, it only meets 71% of need, which is poor. The average need-based award is $37,000, which may sound like a lot of money, but it's actually pretty poor considering the cost of attendance is over $78,000. Just 12% of students are getting their full financial need met. The average merit award is a little over $3,000, which again, small considering the price tag. So students needing a lot of financial aid would likely need to borrow heavily to attend this school, and affluent students are likely to pay full price or close to it. In this example, you'll see that the typical financial aid package isn't nearly as good as Yale's, but it does provide affluent students with much higher merit award than NYU. And like many private colleges, Juniata College in Pennsylvania, it has to provide better merit awards to attract students to a school that really doesn't enjoy a national reputation. Its average merit scholarship is a little over $29,000. Now, let's take a look at private scholarships. Private scholarships are outside award offered by foundations, charities, companies, and civics groups. Parents often don't realize that private scholarships represent the smallest source of college money. The competition for nationally known private scholarships is pretty fierce. In a recent year, for instance, Coca-Cola scholars, they received 112,000 applications for 250 awards. So this makes Coca-Cola scholars about 25 times more selective than Stanford. Your children will face better odds if they focus on capturing local scholarships. And these are scholarships that turn up through high school counselors, libraries, parents' workplaces and organizations, local newspapers. They definitely aren't as easy to find, so not as many students will be applying. In fact, scholarship sites like FastWeb, scholarships.com, and the College Board's search engine, they usually don't have these local ones in their database. And another tip, students may also have better luck looking for scholarships that require essays, because a lot of students see that and they skip them because nobody really likes to, very few students like to write essays. So never skip the essay ones. Beware the financial aid trap. Now, when I first learned about this, I thought this was just horrible, and I didn't understand why it existed. But let me explain. So students who win private scholarships, they're often surprised to discover that their awards end up reducing their financial aid package. Since students have to report all outside scholarships to the financial aid offices, many schools see this as an opportunity to save some money, and they reduce the amount of money that they were going to award the student. In cases where the amount of the scholarship would push the total financial aid over the cost of attendance, the federal government requires schools to adjust their financial aid reward. You can't receive more money than it would cost to go to college. And say if a teen wins a private scholarship, the college could shrink his or her financial aid package by the amount of the award. So if a child wins a $3,000 scholarship, the college could cut aid package by $3,000. In the best case scenario, the school would reduce the loan portion of the package, but sometimes they can do the grant scholarship side or both. And to make it a little more complicated, each school maintains its own policy on how it applies outside scholarships to a financial aid package. So you'll have to check with each school for its policy regarding this, just so you know exactly what you're getting into. Ironically, the scholarship practice will not affect students most in a position to afford college. Affluent students who receive merit scholarships from their schools really don't have to worry about outside scholarships shrinking their awards. Higher income students who don't qualify for financial aid, they can earn any number of outside scholarships and it won't jeopardize their institutional merit scholarships. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our presentation, and no doubt many of you feel like, yikes, this is so much information. How do we smartly process it and proceed? That's a good question, and that leads us to our final set of points. So first, let's take a look at where we started. We started with the main challenge. Families often overpay for college, take on too much debt, and hurt their savings and retirement plans because they tumbled unprepared into the late-stage college funding pressure cooker. Then, we've looked at the details behind these main points. Parents must lead the college selection process. Higher education is actually a buyer's market. Gather the pegs, price, expected family contribution, graduation rate, and starting salary to start the process. Understand how financial aid works to get the best price. And this brings us naturally to the conclusion that you need to start developing your college funding strategy now by getting an expected family contribution analysis. From that baseline, you can begin to gather the rest of your critical information you need to start the hunt for the right school with the lowest possible tuition while protecting your retirement plans. Before we get to the Q&A, I wanted to explain to you College Smart's signature method. It's a 9-step process that we take every family that we work with through, and I wanted to show you where you're at right now. At the bottom left corner is the calculate your expected family contribution and financial aid. Those are the two topics we went over today. And for all the families we work with, we move on next to the long-term savings and investing strategies, which is something you work with us and your advisor on. Then we're on to resume building, test scores and GPAs, scholarship guidance, and then for senior year, school price comparisons, FAFSA assistance, and then once the student starts receiving the financial aid offers from the various schools, we can help with reviewing and comparing those. As you can see, planning for college is a lot more complicated than many people think. It covers a lot of different topics and areas, so we would love to be able to help you through that process. I'd like to leave you with one last thought. Paying for college is going to be one of the biggest purchases of your life, next to a house. So do your research and do the best that you can.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps up the recorded presentation. Now we'll move on to the Q&A. We got a couple minutes left here. First question I wanted to tackle real quick was, how can I print or view the slides after the webinar? Slides going too fast. So there will be an email that'll go out in a few days once the recording is posted. It'll have a link to the recording in there, and then you'll be able to watch the video over again. Let's see. All right, Ryan. I'm curious, if you have worked with blended families or divorce situations and how you determine who should fill out the proper paperwork, or does that matter?
Yes, that is a fairly common question, and it gets a little complicated. But yes, we do work with blended families, and it can be a little tricky because most people default to, the biggest question right away is who fills out the FAFSA form. If you have two families and maybe the student is going back and forth between, and a lot of people default to who fills out, who claims them as a dependent on their taxes, when it really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's the day that you hit submit on the FAFSA form of their senior year, they look back 12 months or a full year, and then it's based on who they spend the night with the most. So if they're staying at one family's house more often throughout the year, that's the family who should fill out the FAFSA. And it can lead to some really interesting planning opportunities, especially if the two families have very different assets and income. Where if you know ahead of time that you need to, maybe if you have a 50-50 split, have the student just spend one more night at the family who has a lower assets or income, or a lower EFC, and that can qualify the student for quite a bit more aid sometimes. But yeah, that's it gets complicated because you're dealing with two families' EFCs and then trying to see which is lower and which you can do the most good with. But yeah, good question.
Okay. Next question here. We've got, if my student only qualifies for an unsubsidized federal loan and it's not necessarily needed to be able to pay for school, is there any logic in still pursuing it in anticipation of it being forgiven in the future?
Yes. The forgiveness thing is that's always kind of a political football that goes back and forth, and there's always a chance of that. I mean, I think there's just another announcement of another round of student loans being forgiven just a couple days ago. But there can also be other reasons that you may want to take it even if you don't need it. Sometimes you can be, if your money is invested and it's making a decent return, like maybe if it's returning more than you would be paying on the loan, that can be a little bit of a gamble. That's definitely a conversation you're going to want to have with your advisor to see which route would be best. But sometimes we'll deal with parents who want the kids to take on all the responsibility while they're in college, and whether they know it or not, they're like, if they're going to help them pay off the loans after school, they don't necessarily have to tell them that. So the student, starts building up that debt every year, hopefully being responsible in their choices because they're part of this process also. And then maybe, after graduation, it's the graduation gift, or we're going to pay this off for you. So that can be another situation where you may want to take it even if you don't need it.
Okay. Kind of leads us into our next question here. If I had a few $100s extra per month to save, should I focus more on adding to retirement funds or to college savings for college funds?
Okay. I really like this question because I used to get it a lot when I was an advisor. And back when I was advisor, we would just do a split. We would say, well, let's just do half and half. And now I know that's not necessarily the best way to do it. Once you see the rules on how FAFSA treats investments, retirement accounts, now oftentimes it can be a much better plan to put all that money into your retirement. For the most important being, you should really take care of your retirement first. You don't want to really sacrifice that to help pay for college. Because I don't know, I like to say, do you want your students to move in with you after college, or do you want to move in with them after you retire? But the reason it can be better to put it all into a retirement account is because that takes it off the FAFSA. The FAFSA doesn't calculate or add in any retirement accounts against your financial aid. Whereas if you're, only putting $50 in retirement, but 50 into another investment like a 529 or checking or savings, that's going to count against your financial aid. So by putting it all into your retirement account, you're actually helping both sides of the equation. And then if you don't need it, you just beefed up your retirement a little bit more.
Okay. Next question here. Have you had any clients you have worked with look at buying a house as an investment and then using as a rental for your kids' college with maybe some other students? So I think that is like if you're going to buy a house close to campus. And are there any pros and cons with that?
Right. So there can be pros and cons, like in any situation. It really boils down to the most important thing is if you're going to qualify for any need-based aid, this can be a strategy that will count against you because the schools are going to look at that rental property as an investment, and any equity in that will reduce your need-based financial aid. But on the other side, if your assets and income are high enough where you weren't going to get any need-based aid anyway, then it's a fantastic idea. You can have the student move in with their friends and have their friends pay the mortgage, and then once they graduate, then you have some options to hang on to it or sell it. It can be a great opportunity and an investment. Yeah, you just have to know where you stand on your EFC before you probably make that decision.
It sounds like with kind of all of these questions, it really boils down to a case by case basis, and it's best to reach out to your college planning specialist or financial professional before you really put things in motion there. But it looks like the Q&A is slowing down a bit here. Ryan, do you have any final thoughts?
It may sound like a broken record, but really that EFC is the very first place you should be going when you're trying to figure out how to best go through the college planning process. Because once you know that, then it makes some of the other decisions easy, or at least simpler. And like you just mentioned, it can be complicated because you're really dealing with three big moving parts in any college plan, and that's the family's finances and situation, like family size, the student themselves, so GPA, test scores, things that make them unique, and then the biggest piece that can shift on you is the specific college that you're looking at or colleges. All those things combine to form one good answer, and if you change something in one, it can change the answer a little bit. So the planning gets more refined the closer you get to senior year, but it's just keeping on top of all the differences and the rule changes, which there are some coming up in a couple of years. It's complicated, and it bleeds into almost every aspect of your financial life, retirement, your home, whether or not that's going to count against you. Even intergenerational, if your grandparents are planning on helping, that can be a fantastic gift to help with education. But if done incorrectly, it can devastate a financial aid package. So knowing who all is helping and then making sure they're doing it in the best way possible, those can be really fun cases to work on.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for the presentation and the discussion. I wanted to thank everybody else again for attending our College Planning 101 webinar. There will be a link to the recorded version of this presentation emailed out in the next couple of days. Please keep an eye out if you would like to listen in again or check out, kind of any of the slides that you missed. I hope that, today you were able to gain insight into how colleges and universities treat the financial aid process and what you can do to position yourself in a better standing to receive aid. If you liked what you heard today, be sure to check out Ryan's website, give Ryan an email, or reach out to me. With that, we're going to go ahead and close things out. Thanks for attending, and take care.